All right. So I should be live on the stream. Boy, am I ever whitey looking today. Where's that coming from? Some color in a man's face. I'm not broadcasting on K Talk because something else is. And so welcome to those of you who are on the stream. I'm not broadcasting at K Talk at the moment because somebody else is. And I'm not going to try and compete with them. I'm just going to have to wait until that stops. So for those of you who are on the stream, so many different things to try to talk about and squeeze it into a 1 hour time. And I think I know who you are that's tuned in. I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy with the way this is set up. And I have always been a difficult person to please, especially in the sense of self. And I want to change the setup. I want to change the camera. I want to change the scheduling. I want to change everything so that I got to be on here every day for the stuff that's going on around this planet. I've got to figure out how I'm going to do that. I have to be on here every day because the stuff that I want to talk about that is important when it happened, because that's what I wanted to start off talking about, was Hegseth and Trump leading this war cry before the generals and admirals a week ago. I think it needs to be discussed, not so much for what was said, but what didn't happen. And I think that tells an awful lot when you consider what did not take place at this meeting. U.S. Secretary of War, and I don't want to say that because it takes Congress to change the name of a cabinet position. I don't think the president can do that. I might be wrong, but I don't think the president can change that. So the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, addressed this meeting of top generals and admirals. I think it was everybody from a 1-star up and whoever their liaison was, who was with them or whatever. Gathering in Quantico. I used to deer hunt in Quantico. I lived about a half an hour north of Quantico, where I grew up, back in Northern Virginia. And it was huge. Quantico is huge. Anyway, they were there to celebrate, ostensibly, this new warrior spirit of the Trump administration. They both cheered changing the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, a decision announced by an executive order, though, as I said, there are some constitutional experts who've been on the air since then saying it requires the action of Congress to do that. And I don't know if it's a simple majority or if it's a 60 vote in the Senate or whatever. But I think the reason perhaps that the president did it was because he knew Congress wouldn't. So anyway, Hegseth's theme was the warrior ethos. And so he spoke for the first hour ranting about the destruction of the woke military created by Biden and others, who hired and appointed leaders based on race and gender rather than on merit. And he said that the word toxic had been used to mean bullying and hazing and was no longer to be tolerated, and referring this to destructive ideologies that are anathema to the Constitution and the laws of nature and nature's God, as Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration. Instead, he says, a new military policy is going to empower and enforce standards without fear of retribution or second guessing. He said under the woke department, promotions and assignments were based on diversity rather than on quality and performance. Now he said it's out with the Chiarellis, which is General Peter Chiarelli, the Army Vice Chief of Staff, and the McKenzies, he said, General Frank McKenzie, who was head of Central Command, and the Millies, General Mark Milley, Chief of General Staff. They're all out. And I want to say something good about Mark Milley before I leave the subject, but Hegseth said he was also investigating the office of the Inspector General and the Office of Equal Employment Opportunity, which he said were responsible for the poisonous culture of risk aversion. He also denounced beards, insisting on being clean-shaven to look professional, and denounced the fat troops and the fat generals and the fat admirals. Hegseth said he's going to give a speech in October about innovation in the military. He's going to give another speech about the role of the military to defend U.S. interests in the Western Hemisphere. And then he ended his speech. If you saw it, it may have made you feel a little uncomfortable. But he ended his speech with this big whoop. Move out and draw fire because we are the War Department. So in grand manner, as one might expect, Hegseth then introduced President Trump as the traditional Hail to the Chief played, and Trump repeated Hegseth's praise of the end of woke policies and the importance of the name change to the Department of War, and then he reviewed his claim resolution of 7 wars, with the 8th one, the Gaza peace, plan, depending on Hamas signing on, and I've got some comments to make about that before the show's over. But he said he still wants to end the war in Ukraine. He's disappointed in President Vladimir Putin's role. He kind of bragged. He said that when one of Putin's subordinates referred to nuclear weapons, he, Trump, had deployed a nuclear sub or 2 to the most lethal weapons that exist on the face of the planet, to the Russian coast. Then he claimed the U.S. subs are undetectable, but Russian subs are not undetectable. And to date, I haven't seen any comments by the Russians in response to that. He said recruitment rates are way up for all the services, including police and firefighters. So his main point was merit, which he said was almost his favorite word after tariffs. He praised the military buildup, the planes, the Golden Dome, complaining that we don't build ships anymore, except submarines. And he says, but we will again, saying he's considering getting battleships back on the line. You know, and in today's military expression, a battleship is just something out there waiting to be sunk. It's much more difficult to sink a submarine than it is a battleship. Anyway, he bragged that the military budget for 2026 is $1 trillion, that there would be a 3.8% pay raise for all those in the military. Then he praised the deployment of troops to the cities of the U.S., praising immigration and customs enforcement for its work, adding that he has changed the policy that ICE officials are not allowed to respond to people harassing them. If they spit, you hit. He said that's what he told them. If they spit on you, you hit on them. He also announced that he is creating a quick reaction force for domestic defense. The Domestic Civil Disturbance Quick Reaction Force is what it's called, to combat all enemies, foreign and domestic. Then he ranted that his tariff policy is making us rich again, and in particularly proud that Europe has now agreed to spend 5% on defense, and that they are buying U.S. weapons to give to Ukraine. Then he said NATO leaders were great people who had been woken up by Putin. Then he closed with fight, 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 win, win, win. Now, that's what was said. What wasn't said? Well, there was no cheering. There was no USA, USA. Now, maybe that's below, flag officers to say something like that. No applause, no standing ovation, just sitting there quiet, listening to how unacceptable they were in the sense of being fat or just being an embarrassment to the military because they just didn't look professional enough. Now, at the beginning of his speech, Trump and Hegseth, I think there was 800 or so military people, generals, admirals, officers. It was kind of eerie. I think Trump entered the room, and as I said, there was no applause. I mean, he normally enters the room, and then all of his friends go into a frantic applause. So obviously, this is not the routine among military people. So he complained and said, well, if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave. But think about your rank and your future. Now, that's the point where the hair went up on the back of my neck when he said that. Well, if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave. But think about your rank and your future. I mean, he basically said, if you get up and leave, I'm going to demote you. If you don't applaud for me, I'm going to demote you. I mean, that's what I got out of this. I mean, it's quite difficult to comprehend sometimes how Trump manages to do these things. But there was an occasion, and this was expressed on the Napolitano podcast the other day, of a general, or at least a colonel or above, being confronted by the same situation. And I don't know, I think the president was George W. Bush. And I think it was around the period of time of the introduction of the Patriot Act. And a similar setting. And the officer just couldn't stand what he was hearing because it was reflective of the Patriot Act and the end of privacy for the American citizen, which we now enjoy today. And what happened thereafter is that this officer was demoted and retired. Demoted and retired from the military because he got up and walked out. That's exactly what at least 10 or 20 of these 800 men and women who were present at this should have done. You can't have the commander-in-chief of all these people present. Well, if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave. But think about your rank and your future. Well, what kind of leadership is that? Now, out of respect for the presidency, not for Donald Trump, regardless of who the president would be, out of response for the office of the presidency, they should sit there and listen to this. But when it gets to the point, and Mark Milley, General Mark Milley made this very clear in a speech not all that long ago when he was still Joint Chiefs Chief, the chief of the Joint Chiefs. When he was talking about how a lot of foreign countries the officer pledge of the military is to the president of that country. And he just was very adamant, and I was hoping to find a clip of this because I heard it elsewhere, where he was just absolutely insistent. Here in America, we do not swear our allegiance to a person, to an office, to an authoritarian, to a dictator, to whatever else. He said, we swear our allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. Against enemies, foreign and domestic, to protect the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. So these officers are sitting there for the most part. I mean, the clips that I saw quietly. And then Trump announces this amazing thing that he wants to use the military inside the United States to train in combating crime in American cities. Now, I'm not a constitutional expert, but I understand posse comitatus, no standing army inside the border of the United States that can be to be used in civilian issues. I think the Constitution, if I remember right, forbids the use of the military domestically, but I might be wrong on that. So given the fact that all these officers did swear an oath to the Constitution, I think this should have some aftermath discussion. At least, I mean, maybe you can say something to that effect. I thought it was absolutely horrible because whenever you use the army domestically, you're either moving in the direction of a military dictatorship, or in any case, the democracy, for whatever that is not looking so good when you have to bring in the military. Now, that's why states have reserve in the individual state. The governor can call out the state military. But when you have the president doing something like this, it's getting very dangerous. Then Hegseth, who made this unbelievable speech, he obviously wants to reverse some of the wokeism and diversity, all these things. I have no problem with that. But then he said, fat generals and admirals are no longer wanted to be seen in the Pentagon. I had to laugh when I heard that. Fat generals and admirals are no longer wanted to be seen in the Pentagon, he said. Now, I have to say that he has, on that, he may have made a point, but I kind of watched the so-called military parade, which Trump organized last year for his birthday or whatever. And if you compare that with the Chinese parade on the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in the Pacific here a month ago, or 2 months, whatever it was, which was an unbelievable drill, where the soldiers were moving in unbelievable precision and numbers. I mean, it was quite a difference. So, obviously it's not totally out of order that the military needs a little bit more discipline and a little bit more attention given to personal appearance. But what he said otherwise, I thought was really hair-raising. He said this: if you want to be for peace, you have to be for strength. Peace through strength. These are words from which I get mixed internal feelings about this. He said, pacifists are naive. We have to be prepared to fight any war. Now, realistically, the United States, if they do not want to fight, they wouldn't have an enemy. If we weren't out there fighting and stirring up things around this planet right now, we wouldn't have an enemy. The Islamic groups, the jihadis, would not be our enemy if we weren't over there shooting them. The United States has 800 plus military bases around the world. Nobody is attacking these 800 military bases. What does that mean? There is no plan by Russia or by China to attack the United States militarily. And I think it's just extremely dangerous, because if you think you always need an enemy, you end up having a war that you brought on yourself. And I think the sign of the times, clearly the sign of the times, is that we're going in a completely different direction. I'm not naive. I'm very realistic because I have thought about it a lot and studied what it would do to the world if there were to be a nuclear war. And I've read some of the experts of Ted Postel and the other fellow on my radio show, the nuclear war experts. And what would happen if we ended up with a nuclear war this time because we poked the bear one too many times? There would be nobody left to even consider what happened. There wouldn't be anybody left to write an anthology that said, hey, look at all these people who said this was coming. Look at all the warnings we had. Look at all the warnings the Russians gave. There wouldn't be anybody left to write that down. The signs of the time, excuse me, the signs of the times is cooperation. If Western countries would signal to the global majority that they intend to cooperate with them on economics, on politics, on culture, on all kinds of fields, we could move into a new era of civilization because the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization have clearly said they do not, they will not regard themselves as a counter bloc to NATO or to any other bloc, but they're open for anybody who wants to join them. And I really think there should be some discussion about that because as we are now marching, like in Germany, where Merz is saying that Germany is no longer at peace, says this last week. Not quite yet at war, but we're no longer at peace. We're somewhere in between. These kinds of warmongering statements can become a self-fulfilling prophecy more quickly than you think. And I think there should be discussion on this. I think some Democrats have already tried to comment on it, which one should not dismiss that it's the usual Republican-Democrat polarization. But there must be some discussion on the value of the Constitution, given the fact that the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution is coming up here in a few months, less than a year now, and the Constitution should be upheld at that anniversary, not removed. So, if Trump wants to win the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize, maybe instead of changing the Department of Defense to the Department of War, he should call it the Department of Peace. I know it sounds a little out there, but I think it's a good idea. It's a very, very clear that every billion that goes to the military buildup is a billion that is lacking in infrastructure investment, in health and education. Now, a little bit on the murder of Charlie Kirk. And the just the timing. I think it's well established now he was not shot by poor Tyler Robinson. I think that's the guy's a patsy. Oswald might be in his name there somewhere, but the guy is just a patsy. We know that. We know there have been several demonstrations online on YouTube of military grade shooters shooting that 30 caliber bullet at various thicknesses of steel plate. And I think, if I remember right, all the way up to a quarter inch steel plate, that bullet penetrated it at 150 yards. And to say that Charlie Kirk's neck was Superman's neck and was solid and strong enough to stop that bullet when that bullet can go through quarter-inch steel plate. And you see Kash Patel still hanging on to this lie. I'm just as disturbed by that man now as I was once encouraged by the chance of his being appointed director of the FBI. For that matter, Secretary Gabbard, or Director Gabbard, old Tulsi, how much do you hear from her anymore? You hear a lot from Bobby Kennedy Jr. because Trump agrees with him. I don't know. And then did you hear the address that I just got through talking about here? The address to these 800 officers? Did you hear President Trump's address? He's bending over more. His head is tipping off to the side more. If you know how to get in touch with this man so I can fix his spine, I would like to be able to do that. And monotone. Complete, straight monotone. Now I'm starting to worry for his mental faculties. So anyway, back to Charlie Kirk and the fact that we know that Robinson didn't kill him. It had to be somebody else. And it had to be a small enough caliber that whatever went into his neck didn't come out of it, because there's no exit wound. And there's no hospital reports. There's no autopsy reports. There's no autopsy photos. There's no mention of an autopsy at all. So I think the role of his wife, now the good widow of Charlie Kirk, definitely was a very important intervention and contrasted very, very positively to the remarks of Trump, because she said, the big thing she said is she forgives the murderers. And I can only imagine what her emotional condition was that showed some greatness on her part. But then, of course, there are those who are saying, nah, that's just a cover-up for that she, when you go back and look at her whole history, the Trump modeling and just all the way through, it gets more and more confusing. And the case is falling to pieces. But what do we know for sure? We know that 2 days, and we get this from Candace Owens, 2 days before the murder, before the execution, Charlie turns down all the money that he's being offered, the $150 million by the Israeli representatives, to have his youth groups, his influencers, start turning around this slow building anti-Israel rhetoric that's been showing up, and get them to be much more positive regarding Israel. And he said 2 days prior to this with Megyn Kelly that it was his intention to turn that entire wheel around. 2 days later, he's dead. And who's the very first person to get on the airway after his assassination to say, we didn't do it? And Netanyahu. Because that was the first group that everybody suspected because of Charlie's change of position regarding the genocide. And as more and more people are becoming aware of the fact that they don't particularly like the killing of babies. But now you got to be careful what you say, don't you? So Trump was commenting on the fact that Erica Kirk was forgiving. She forgave the shooter, referring to the recognized shooter, who we now know is not the shooter. And then Trump said, he said, well, he was asked about how he felt about what she said. And he said, I can't take this point of view. I hate my opponents. Sometimes I think Trump is his own worst enemy, because I think Trump needs some aesthetic education. So I'm just going to leave that at that point right there. But it's interesting that in the time that Charlie Kirk did the work that he did with Trump voters and got, was it 23, 26%, something like that, of the youth vote? 26% of President Trump's vote was youth, and largely because of the work that Charlie Kirk was doing. And what was Charlie Kirk doing? What was the work he was doing? He would have these open forums, and he let his detractors and his critics, as well as those who supported him, come up to the microphone for a few minutes and express their opinion, and he would answer them. And he didn't answer them with anger or ridicule or talk down to them. He just expressed his opinions as a born-again believer in Jesus Christ and how that influenced his social, ethic, political, military, financial viewpoint of the world, always hinging on his faith and belief in the blood of Christ. And it influenced enough of college youth to actually vote for Trump, which would not have happened without Charlie's effort. Trump probably would not have won had it not been for Charlie Kirk. Several experts say that, not that I'm any expert. Now, I want to contrast that with, you see the look on some of these faces of some of the ministerial work that Charlie was doing on campus. When he makes a point in defense of the Constitution or in defense of the Declaration, and how it supersedes cultural ideas today. And you see the look on the people who are questioning his viewpoints. And some of them looked absolutely shocked that they were hearing something they had never heard before. And so an awful lot of what Charlie Kirk was doing was educating the uneducated youth who got out of high school not knowing crap about the history of this country or the documents upon which their God-given rights are protected or should be protected. Now contrast that. What could have happened in this country had they not created the Department of Education and introduced these anti-American concepts in the teaching of American youth when it comes to history and civics and political awareness? I've often talked about my American history teacher in the 11th grade, who was a colonel in the Battle of the Bulge, and my civics teacher in the senior year, who also was a colonel in the Battle of the Bulge. Now, how do you suppose these two men felt about America and the Constitution and the freedoms that we enjoy here in this country, so often without giving credence to where they came from or the responsibility of the government to protect us in its enjoyment? What Charlie Kirk was doing was one man across the whole country slowly waking up a spectrum of the youth to something they shouldn't have gotten out of the 8th grade without knowing. Now, I just want to make that point because I take care of a lot of young people in my clinic. Sports injuries, gymnastics, cheer, trampolines, motorcycles, whatever else. It just, kids aren't going to stop being kids, and the technology of today allows kids to be even more dangerous in their behaviors. And I have conversations with them all the time. And I have test questions that I ask that will indicate, without judgment, indicate their understanding of freedom and the principles of that are enumerated in our founding documents. And there's one of two answers. One, they really are terribly ignorant of it. Or the other one, depending on the school they went to, I can sit there and have an in-depth discussion of the Sixth Amendment. When there are kids who do not know that there are 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights that are not just high school grads. They're getting ready for college, or they're getting ready for their missions or whatever else. The whole point of this babbling that I'm doing is, had the Department of Education not come along trying to standardize everything, but left education up to the parents, who then would control the school boards in the various districts in which they lived, to make sure that what they wanted their kids to be taught, their kids were in fact being taught. Where would we be today? Who would we be electing to office today? So I think the only way we're going to get to peace, and it has nothing to do with the naivety of Mr. Hegseth. It has to do with the founding principles of this country. The founding fathers, who were talking about a harmony of interests. I just started watching on HBO Max the John Adams series. I think there's 7 episodes. I'm going to watch the 7th one tonight, because I'd seen it once before when it first came out years and years ago. And the relationship between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and the pressures that were placed upon John Adams, especially as an ambassador to France, then ambassador at the court of St. James, and then coming home and being vice president to George Washington, being president, the second president himself, with Jefferson as his vice president, and the kinds of pressures and family stuff and financial stuff. It just amazed me that a crop of people, and his wife, Abigail, the conversations that would go on between Abigail and her husband, John, and she's considered, of course, one of the founding mothers of this country. So well educated as they were, simply because they spent an awful lot of time reading. And then, the principles of the founding fathers are so superior, even to this day, to others that are constantly being represented. But we have to have an enemy. And I think the foreign policy of John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, that it's not the purpose of the United States to go abroad chasing monsters, but to build a partnership with like-minded countries, is a much better recipe. So that's kind of where I am on all of this, in the sense of this is what we should be doing. Creating strict, tough, but welcomed trade agreements with all these different countries, and keep our armies here. We don't need those 800 bases. Nobody is attacking those 800 bases. The only enemies that exist in these various locations are the enemies we create by our being there. Well, I want to go on here with some other things. One of the things that does encourage me about the FBI is that the FBI is severing their ties with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Kash Patel just said this a few days ago, I think it was Friday. He said the Southern Poverty Law Center long ago abandoned civil rights work and turned into a partisan smear machine. Their so-called hate map has been used to defame mainstream Americans and even inspired violence. That disgraceful record makes them unfit for any FBI partnership. Under this FBI, all ties with the SPLC have now been officially terminated. Now, the Southern Southern Poverty Law Center has maintained this hate map of groups that they deem to be extremists, which has been merely a finely veiled excuse to attack political opponents. So, as with the announcement just days earlier that the FBI was cutting ties with the Anti-Defamation League, the recent discovery that the Southern Poverty Law Center had placed Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA on its list of hate groups landed it in the crosshairs of the MAGA networks. And so the Southern Poverty Law Center had put Turning Point USA on its list way back in May, as reported by Fox News. So Charlie Kirk was the leader of a massive hate group, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And that was one of the reasons why Kash Patel said we were not have anything to do with him. And just a few months earlier, he had cut ties with the Anti-Defamation League, because the Anti-Defamation League isn't so oriented towards stopping defaming comments regarding Israel, but that they are a group who is out trying to paint the opposite, the opposing people, as Nazis, as male supremacists, and anything they can possibly do to denigrate the position of anybody who doesn't like genocide. Now, Andrew Colvett, who's the spokesman for Turning Point USA, said this Thursday. What's happening right now to the ADL and the SPLC is critically important and deadly serious. They are both part of an ecosystem leveraged by radical left vigilantes to dehumanize conservatives and stoke political violence. They provide the sheen of legitimacy for the left's violent foot soldiers. He said, did these contribute to the assassin's motive? The influence of the ADL and the SPLC must be completely purged from any serious company, organization, and agency. I think all these guys are lining up to get shot. Colvett also reposted a May post from Charlie Kirk when the Southern Poverty Law Center had put his organization on the hate list, in which Kirk called them a laughing stock that's been fleecing sacred grandmas for decades. Scared grandmas, not sacred. Been fleecing scared grandmas for decades. Then he warned of the Southern Poverty Law Center's game plan. He said it's to scare financial institutions into debanking us, pressuring schools to cancel us and demonize us so as to unhinge lunatic feelings justified targeting us. He said, remember the Family Research Council? An SPLC-inspired gunman went after them. They'd left nothing more than to see Turning Point USA in the crosshairs. Whew. This is really interesting. All right, now Putin. What time? Oh my goodness, it's already almost 10 till. While President Putin, during his extensive comments at the Valdai Forum back a week ago, indicated that Russia had the capability to deal with the U.S. Tomahawk missiles if they are in fact provided to the Ukrainians. Remember, Tomahawks, even though they can carry nuclear warheads, they don't travel that fast. They travel about as fast as a commercial jet, about 600 miles an hour. And so, since they're not hypersonic, the anti-missile system of the Russians, the anti-missile systems that are now in the Ukraine in the sense of the oblasts, the eastern oblasts, can easily shoot down these. I mean, they're not worried about these Tomahawks. What I'd be worried about is if shooting down a Tomahawk that had a nuclear warhead on it would cause the nuclear warhead to explode. Anyway, Putin indicated that that this would be significant escalation if this were to occur. And so speaking while he was at the Valdai, he said it's likely that for the U.S. to decide on supplying Tomahawks to the Ukraine, it would severely harm U.S.-Russia relations. And when it comes to American deliveries of new weapon systems, Putin said, including the long-range, high-precision systems like the Tomahawk. I've already said that this will lead to the destruction of our relations, or at least the positive trend that's emerged in these relations. So the U.S. so far has made, that I know of, made no positive official decision to send Tomahawks to the Ukraine, yet it's been discussed by multiple people in the U.S. administration, including Vance. Other commentators have observed that there is a dearth of Tomahawks, even for the U.S. Now, despite Hamas's acceptance to pursue this new peace agreement, and despite President Trump's demand that Israel halt all of its strikes, the bombing still hasn't stopped. I was just watching on Fox this morning this camera panning shot of Gaza City. Holy smoke, there was nothing standing. Nothing standing. And the streetways between all of the collapsed buildings were clear, so it's an older picture where dozers have gone through and cleaned up the debris between the buildings. But they're all pancaked. They're all just, there's just nothing standing. They're just rubble. And so President Trump has demanded that Israel stop its airstrikes. But the bombing hasn't stopped. He has demanded that they stop shooting, but the shooting hasn't stopped. So over the course of yesterday, Al Jazeera is reporting that 24 Palestinians have been killed since Netanyahu signed this thing a week ago. Over 24 Palestinians have been killed, citing local sources. Reuters said witnesses reporting that Israeli planes and tanks pounded areas across the Gaza Strip, destroying several residential buildings. So Amjad al-Shawah, who's head of the Palestinian non-governmental organization network, which liaises with the United Nations and international humanitarian organizations, told Reuters that Gaza City has been experiencing acute shortages of food and fuel days after Israel blocked the route from the south to the north. There's also reports that Israel is moving quietly, rapidly, with plans to greenlight the expansion of settlements in the West Bank. So let me ask you the big question of the morning. You think there's any intention on the part of Netanyahu to actually follow that document that he signed in the presence of Donald Trump? Of course not. Netanyahu's made his intentions very clear. He wants every last Palestinian removed from the surface of the earth. Because this continuation of the occupations, bombing, and massacres exposes Netanyahu's lies about reducing military operations against civilians. It also called on the international community and Arab and Islamic states in particular to bear the legal and humanitarian responsibilities and to take some urgent action to protect and aid the people. All right, and now old Ben-Gvir is getting upset because if the Gaza peace plan goes through, Ben-Gvir, Israel's Minister of National Security, is going to step down and quit. I think he intends to take his ball and go home, which will be no loss. No loss at all. Now, the various reports and the comments that Trump may release long-range Tomahawk missiles for Ukraine to use in deep strikes in Russia, according to Dmitry Peskov, will create new and serious rounds of tension. He said this: American officials in interviews this week discussed the possibility of delivering such missiles and generally considered the possibility of strikes deep into Russian territory. This is, of course, a rather dangerous symptom, and it cannot go unnoticed in Moscow. We have noticed it, and if this were to happen, it would be a new serious escalation of tensions. He says there is no magic pill or magic weapon for Kyiv. Trump has said, or Putin has said that over and over again, as many of the pundits who show up on the Politanos podcast. There's no magic pill. It's all over with. It's all over with. The over the last, oh, I think the last 30 days, it's reported that the Ukrainian forces have had 150,000 desertions. So while Zelensky is talking about the new 150,000 conscripts they have that they're sending to the battle zones, 150,000 have deserted. What does that tell you? Indeed, what does that tell you? It's almost hilarious. It's heartbreaking. It just tears me up to see what's going on. The slaughter, the 7,000 to 10,000 dead weekly on the part of the Ukrainians. And the slaughter just continues. And now we're talking about sending Tomahawk missiles. All right, I think that's going to do it for today. I have some more update for you tomorrow as we find out more of what's going on. But what's important here? What's important is when the president and Hail to the Chief played, nobody moved a muscle in that meeting a week ago with the generals and the admirals and the other officers that were present, 800 of them. Nobody got up and walked out. Nobody applauded. That tells me something right there. That tells me something very scary. Then what else is going on? The refusal of the FBI to come out and start talking the truth regarding the execution of Charlie Kirk. That's another high point of today's show. And then the Tomahawk missiles and the fact that Trump is trying to play a third party. Well, we'll sell our weapons to, people around the country, or people around the planet. Our weapon, they're not our weapons. They're the weapons of the military-industrial complex. Don't get confused on that. They're not my weapons. And because they have a large supply to get rid of, who better to sell them to than the Ukrainians? But we can't give them, we can't sell them directly to the Ukrainians because it looks like we would want to make war with Russia. So we will sell them to European nations who want to use them for their own individual national defensive postures, knowing full well that they're going to sell them to Zelensky, whose money to buy them is coming from you, the taxpayer in America. Now that ought to be something to chew on today. All right, I'm going to bring an end to the stream. I think that's enough babbling. I'll have more for you tomorrow. All is not lost. There's still a lot of hope out there, and I'll try to find that for you tomorrow.